So we have amended CSFTL 1-205 to include certain, propose certain recommendations from a study which was performed some time ago in 2019. According to the amendment, the operator should apply appropriate FRM to actively manage the fatigue effect of night duties and late arrivals in relation to the surrounding duties and rest periods. So when planning and implementing the appropriate FRM, the operator should distinguish between three types of night duties. I won't repeat, you will see this either through the slide or through the regulation itself. For the late finish duties, we have two options. You can find the definition of late finish in ORO FTL 1058. So we may have an early type, then we have a late finish which a late finish duty which finish between 2300 and 159, or for a late type of disruptive schedule, we may have a late finish which is between midnight and 159. The amendment was only on AMC and guidance material, so there was no amendment to the rules, there was no amendment to the CSs. Yes, it was an amendment of the CS, but it was not amendment of the implementing rules. We amended the AMC1 or FTL 250 to include training on the optimum use of rest opportunities for crew members. In a GM to this ORO FTL 1-205, we explained the term appropriate FRM in relation to the more complex FRMS concept. Well, actually, we explained the difference. Then in GM2, to the same CS, we explained that operator applies appropriate FRM through its safety risk management system and the aircrew rostering process, which means you apply appropriate FRM with the safety management system at hand. In GM3, we have explained that we explained how appropriate FRM is applied through aircrew rostering process and that obtaining sufficient sleep is a shared responsibility between the operator and crew members. Another GM4 explains how appropriate FRM is applied to consecutive night duties and consecutive late finish duties. Not single, consecutive here. And under GM5, we explain the peer sleep-wake model, which may be used by aircrew to assess their own levels of fatigue and sleep depth before and fitness for duty before assuming an FTP before. Assuming, maybe it's the right term, an FDP. Okay, so English is not my native language, so I am excused. I won't explain too much this slide. We did last year in Madrid, we did a poll, and what we found out during this poll was that people generally know what appropriate FRM is. They either know well that the operator applies it or that the operator does not apply appropriate FRM, so they're well aware. So crew are, to the expectation, well informed of the regulation and what should be done when they do night duties and what appropriate sleep opportunity means for them. So this is the end, and I leave you in the hands of Transavia.
So, good morning, everybody. My name is Nydia van Dijk, and I'm a fatigue specialist at Transavia. And this is my colleague, Melissa Lagemann, and she's continuous improvement specialist. Today, we will walk you through how we moved beyond FTL compliance to implement appropriate FRM, integrating it into the planning chain, empowering a fatigue working group to drive the change, and later formalizing governance to scale it. With appropriate FRM introduced in late 2023, we met a natural tension: legal FTL limits, labor agreements, and a risk-based approach. Teams asked, for example, if we're FTL compliant, how far do we go? What level of risk is acceptable? And who decides when to adjust? To move from debate to learning, we started with people by forming a working group. We formed a fatigue working group early, intentionally before writing rules. The goal was to create a safe space to explore fatigue risk across the planning chain, to try out mitigations, and to pick up on patterns. This enabled us to learn without bureaucracy and to build momentum. Meanwhile, we relied on data to steer our efforts. We've put a full FRM cycle into practice. Before publication, we scan rosters and pairings to anticipate risk. After operation, we compare scans with actuals and reports. This gave the working group objective signals to target mitigations and track outcomes. Of course, change met resistance, understandably. Colleagues asked fair questions. If pairings are legal, why intervene? Why reopen build seasons? The planning chain stretches across 5 different departments, each with its own priorities. Aligning them was a major challenge. By showing specific cases and measurable results, the working group turned abstract discussions into concrete decisions. What started as a collection of individuals became a real team, supported by senior leadership and willing to challenge legacy ways of working. We created shared ownership, continuous improvement loops, a safe environment to openly review fatigue risks, and this cultural shift changed the tone of our conversations. We reported simple and stable metrics: count of pairings with elevated fatigue risk, share of schedules affected per roster or per season. Sharing this with FSAC put the scale into perspective, shifting from fear to focus. It clarified where mitigations matter most. At that point, we needed clarity on who decides what and when to scale what worked. Only after the team had learned enough did we formalize governance. So the planners know when they can adjust pairings independently, so they know when to escalate to management, and we have standard communication routines. This turned successful practices into a guide without taking away people's judgment. Here's what changed operationally once team learning met clear governance. In 2025, we saw concrete benefits: earlier flags, earlier fixes, fewer last-minute disruptions, and better crew experience. The sequence mattered: team first to learn, then governance to scale and sustain. To understand adoption, Melissa will zoom out to the change model we used.
Does it work? Yeah, there we go. Well, a model. We use something that's quite naturally to humans. We're always transitioning. And when we transition to something new, we always have to let go of the old, of old assumptions, of old rules, of old working ways, and move into a time where we are working on new ways. And that's where exactly our working group lives now. And we are trusting that we're moving forward to a point where we are integrating all the new routines. And this shift from separation to transition unlocked new behaviors across teams. As resistance eased, curiosity rose. Teams upstream in network design, they started listening to the feedback from the working group and asking fatigue-aware questions, creating early opportunities to design out risk. And to support this cultural shift, we started tailoring training to rules. We are letting go of the one-size-fits-all approach. Crews, planners, managers, they face different decisions and constraints. By tailoring training, we aligned mental models, or we aim to do that, and improve consistency in how fatigue signals lead to action. And training works best when we communicate openly and reporting. And when we pair our model output with crew narratives, gives us more depth. Reports explained why certain patterns emerged and informing smarter mitigations and validating where governance thresholds were set. Finally, here's where we're heading next. Our focus is to really deepen our analytics to spot structural risks, continue training evolution as roles mature, and strong communication to keep the reporting culture healthy. And let's close with the practical takeaways for operators. These are the core messages we hope you take away. For us, the experience is that training, governance clarity, and data transparency were foundational to our fatigue risk management. Thank you, and let's continue to shape the future together.
Zo, moeten we hier blijven zitten?
Nee?
Thanks for that. And I have to say this is particularly the part of these events when we have them that I love is hearing these different stories of different organizations on how it works, how it fits with them. You know, already on the flight, you know, coming over from Munich, you're hearing, sat next to somebody from the Swedish Pilots Union telling us about some of the interesting things they have, and all these different stories, whether it's in the presentations or at coffee, is exactly what this is about. So the next presentation, if I could invite Linards to come up, and yeah, over to you, sir. We have that. There we go.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Linards Daugavietis, and I am head of crew planning at ETF Airways. So a little bit about ETF Airways. We're a Croatian charter / ACMI company. Our offices are in the lovely capital of Croatia, Zagreb. Our business stretches across many places in the world. We have had clients in Europe, South America, Africa, Middle East and Indian Ocean regions. And all of that is done by approximately 110 crew members in our company. So as for our fleet, currently we have 3 737 NGs who are named Enterprise, Voyager, and Discovery. As for the names, those who know, I guess they would know why they are called like that. And we are soon introducing 2 extra aircraft into our fleet, one of which will be ATR turboprop aircraft. That should have been delivered in February, but at the end, you know how aviation is. Nothing goes as per plan. It will happen in March. And 5th aircraft will be another 737NG called Explorer. So yeah, some slight facts about the company. The data maybe is a bit dated since we're spending our winter now in South America. So the total distance has definitely increased since the aircraft had to get there and they're flying there a lot. And likewise for the airports. During our operations, which have started in 21, we have visited some quite interesting locations, which is Svalbard, La Reunion, Greenland, and Myanmar as part of our ops. But that's about the airline. Now let's go to the appropriate fatigue risk management. Today I'll tell you, I'll keep my presentation in 4 parts. First, I'll tell you how did we start with all of this. Second of all, I'll tell you about what methodology and approach we choose along our way. Then I'll tell you where do we stand currently with appropriate FRM into our operations, and yeah, then I'll give you some future challenges we see and potential implementations. So yeah, this amendment arrived on one day, and naturally the first question was, where do we go from here? There was quite of an urgency actually to implement it, but our lovely team, yeah, we are really, how to say, we can get quickly these things done. I'd say we're a lovely team, and that's why it was the least of the issues. But some things that arose from this, generally speaking, the amendment and the new regulation was clear, I think, for most of the operators, that there has to be more restrictive approach towards night duties, and that we have to give better tools to the crew to actually achieve, I mean, to do the night flights in less fatigue and in a better shape, I'd say. And but the questions that came to us at the first was, of course, about the model. And yeah, the 3 questions are what fatigue, predictive or proactive tools will we use in our operations? Subsequently, what will be the procedures actually to use these tools within our operations? And at the end, how will we actually review that any of this, what we are doing, works? So naturally for us, since we didn't have any exposure to these models before, we looked at this offered one, the prior sleep-wake model. I assume for many in the audience, yeah, this might ring some bell. Unfortunately for us, we understood already at the get-go that there is no way that this could work within our operations. The positive part from this was that we understood actually what we don't want into our operations and what would most likely completely not work. And based on that, we created some criteria on how we actually should choose such model for us. And the first thing was that we figured that there has to be as much automation in the process as possible. Because as it was visible in that model, there was a lot of manual calculations and things like this. And in the fast-paced environment we are living in, I think in the long term it's a no-go. Even though we're a small operator, we could most likely survive with it. In the long run, it wouldn't work for us. Another one was a solution that can be used effectively by planning and crewing teams. What I mean by that is that what we also kind of didn't want in this whole process is that actually our crew, preparing for some night flight, would have to sit somewhere and to do again some calculation. Are they legal? Are they not legal? Are they fatigued or they're not fatigued? And it could create a contradictory situation in which you kind of want to do the good thing, to calculate the scores and to understand where do you stand, but actually you spend time and you could get fatigued by that. I mean, it might sound funny, but I think that would be the operational reality. For us, we would have to potentially catch down the crew members. For the crew members themselves, I don't know how many in the audience there are crew planning or crewing people. We all know that many times for even seasoned crew, they have issue calculating their FDPs, rest periods, and if you add on top calculating their fatigue scores, it could end up how it could end up. The next thing we actually wanted to do, since we're an ACMI company, for us it's important to have a heat map of sorts. Where do we stand with fatigue situations? Since many times what you plan at the start of the month is not the reality when you come actually to the days of operations. Since you're flying ad hoc, some flights might have added, there might have been some schedule changes, so we wanted something that could control both parts of this. And last but not least, since right now we're a rather small company, but we're planning to evolve, we wanted something that could grow with us together. That was one of our considerations. So we went with, we did some market research, and from what we did, SAFTEFAST was the solution for us. As for the physical implementation, we were lucky enough that it was already within our crewing and crew planning system. The only part, you have to activate and go. But it doesn't end up here. You still have to have some procedures to run it. You have scores, that's nice, but where do you go from there? And as I kind of already described, how we are going about this process is that we are analyzing it in two parts. Our crewing system can tell us by sending us automated reports who are the crew members who actually are assigned for night or late duties. And then based on that, we run analysis. If the analysis is below our threshold, we change the crew member. If everything is all right, we keep with the published roster. And for the 72 hours, the process is similar, but adding to this, we also send advisory to our crew how to best prepare for such night duties. And what I want to add, we kind of treat it as illegality. So if you're below some threshold, you're not flying. The same as if you would be illegal or on FDP, you're not flying. So this is the approach we kind of took here. And here I just kind of described the process again. This is for the next 72 hours. How do we go with this? I will not, again, go through it. What else we did based on this? We also introduced Safety Action Group. And this was in effort actually to understand where do we stand with all of this. So these are for us monthly meetings where we basically review the previous month in terms of FTL, in terms of what fatigue reports we have had, operational disruptions, and this is how we analyze and go forward from there. Also, we have set some SPIs, which we also analyzed during the meetings, and So, this is also a slight overview of the appropriate FRM within ETF, so the things I kind of described before. And as for the future challenges in terms of appropriate FRM, the first one actually is crew surveying, because one thing is actually checking the fatigue scores, which gives you one part of the story, but I think it's important to actually measure where crews stand with this. And yeah, it might indicate that maybe our thresholds are wrong, or maybe some other part in our whole operation is not working. So this is the thing we're planning to do this year. Another thing is to potentially use the model we are using now only for night and late duties. I have written also early, but that is not true. Yeah, to use this model potentially for all of the duties, to have better, again, awareness of where do we stand with fatigue in all of this. And last but not the least, finding more means to monitor and predict crew fatigue within our operations. What will that be? We'll find out in due time. Anyhow, thank you for your attention.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And I think, again, it was great to see a completely different type of operator and completely different examples. Remember to keep your questions coming on the Slido, and we'll follow up with those afterwards. So for the next presentation, we're going to follow up with Tomas from Jeppesen. Over to you, sir. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a little bit of the Jeppesen perspective of managing fatigue risk throughout the crew management process and how that relates to appropriate FRM. And I'm also going to share a few tools that you can consider downloading. I have shared a PDF of this presentation version. It contains a few hyperlinks to supporting material. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that will be shared later on. If you don't get it, you see my email address to the bottom right there if you'd like to drop an email, and I'll share that PDF, of course. So what I will talk about, I will give just one slide with an intro and a background to Jeppesen. Nowadays, actually, Jeppesen 4 flights since the 1st of November. We've been split out of Boeing. And then I will go into appropriate FRM, and I will group this into 4 sections that you see there. And as we go along, I'm going to share those hyperlinks to additional resources that you can consider using. What you see on the right-hand side there is actually biomathematical modeling. You see my last week, my office days, those are the brown blobs there. I don't have a pointing device, but that curve below that jumps up and down is showing the predicted alertness level out of a biomathematical model. The lower down on the screen, the worse it is. But being office days, I had an easy time last week there. So the intro part, Jeppesen, we are providing fatigue risk management solutions for 3 actor groups: for crew members, for the fatigue safety action group, and for the crew management process. And in the center there you see one example of a biomathematical model, a BAM. And BAM by itself is nothing you can touch or look at. It needs to be implemented in an application, such as an application for the crew members, like I showed you on the former slide, where you can feed in your roster, or you can load your roster, and you can predict fatigue risk into the future. Or tools for the fatigue safety action group to monitor the entire operation, or at the bottom left, actually influencing what you are planning for the crew members throughout the crew management process. So I'm going to cover a little bit about that, and why do I think that is relevant here? Well, at Jeppesen up in Gothenburg, where Jeppesen has an office of roughly 400 people, we are producing crew management solutions for a lot of different operators. And among the operators with more than 30 tails worldwide, roughly 50% of the crew there are touched or sort of planned into context by the products that we build out of Gothenburg. And in Gothenburg, we also have my team that works dedicated with fatigue risk management for these operators. So that was the background, and I think most of you have seen this slide, the blue mark text, And I've underlined some red pieces here that I'm picking up on what does it mean with appropriate FRM. And I'm grouping them into these 4 pieces, like I mentioned. I'm going to cover metrics, working predictively, scientifically based principles, and so forth, right? So I'm starting off with the first part. Metrics, that's a really important part. Of course, when you schedule crew for the next month, how good or how bad is that solution? And we've heard a lot about here, maybe measuring the number of rosters that are worse than a certain limit or focusing on duties. But if you think of it, where risk really materializes is on a flight. It's a flight that will potentially have issues once it's planned. And we need to base it on science and of course statistics and data. So what is the probability for throwing 7 using 2 dice? We can calculate that quite easily, right? It's roughly 0.17. 1 out of 6, we're going to throw 7. What is the probability of having a fatigue-related incident or accident on that flight, the 3rd flight there that you see in that crew pairing? And of course, in reality, there is a probability that the fatigue levels of the 2 pilots typically will lead into either a lapse, slip, mistake, or violation, like the Mangalore accident, where the captain deliberately and knowingly violated several operating procedures, in that case relating to sleep inertia. So there is a probability there that this particular flight will bend metal in the end. And it's not the flight duty. If this were 4 flights, it's not that flight duty that is going to bend metal. It is one of the flights, right? So we like to have the probability calculated on a flight. And that's, of course, extremely difficult, and it's a number that contains a lot of zeros, 0 point and a lot of zeros before the numbers are showing up. But what we can do is to use a proxy for that probability. We can estimate a number by estimating the alertness levels of the crew members out by a mathematical model and converting that to human error, as we've seen in several scientific studies on human performance. And typically when you become more and more or less, more and more fatigued or less and less alert, that risk accelerates. So it becomes quickly bigger and bigger as we become more fatigued. So that's the first resource that I'm sharing here on the bottom left. This is one way of quantifying that probability, or a proxy for that probability, so that you can measure it. Measure it on all of your flights, or one of the fleets, or one of the bases, or one of the ranks. It depends on what you're looking at. But without the quantification, and it's actually, if you think of it, it's not only that we can use, we need to have a quantification, because 99% or more of all of the decisions, what is coming before a flight, is taken by a machine of these operators with more than 30 tails. There's no planner sitting there deciding that this flight should follow this other flight. It's done by machines, right? That are running many, many hours. And they need to be informed what is good planning and what is bad planning. And for that, of course, we have legality, we have the regulatory rules, we have the union rules, but that is only saying okay or not okay on a binary level. Here we want a quantification, a proxy for the probability of a fatigue-related incident or accident on each and every flight within the next month for all of our crew, for example. So we need to have a quantification, and that's the first resource that I'm sharing. That's one way of quantifying it that I think every single Jeppesen customer that are using our FRM functionality is today using. So I'm coming back to that metric, but if you look at it on a high level, and now I move into safety risk management, doing something different for actually managing risk and moving it to as low as reasonably practicable. On the left-hand side, you see a planned solution for the next month, And on the right-hand side, you see exactly the same flights being planned, but in a different way, where risk has been pushed to be reduced. And on the left-hand side, you see the flights that are predicting poorly. Those are colored red on the left-hand side. They have then been put in a better protective context on the right-hand side. So you basically influence the machines while they are building the crew pairings and the crew rosters to place the most challenging flights in a better context when it's possible. Some of the time, the flight schedule, of course, will limit your option here, what you can actually do. But many flights are possible to place in an easier context with what is following prior. Another part to manage risk for the manual decisions taken. A lot of airlines, for example, the training planning is often done in a manual fashion. Then it's of course important to inform the actual planner what risk is. But you don't have time to look it up in a scientific report or run it through a model where you sort of calculate things by hand or anything. You need a model connected into the solution itself. Just like was shown here for ETF, they have connected a model that shows numbers, right? In our case here, you see the circled piece, we have a risk marker that is popping out when risk exceeds certain levels. And the longer the marker, the more red the marker becomes, it catches the eye of the planner, and you can consider trying to plan it differently. I have another resource I'm sharing there to control fatigue risk from the flight schedule through pairing construction, through roster construction, roster publication, roster maintenance, and day of operation, taking you through the full crew management process. It's 8 pages long, and this is the current proposed best practice of managing risk throughout the crew management process from the Jeppesen side. I also like to point out that biomathematical models is only one part of it. So a really important part when it comes to managing risk is also managing these aspects. Crew have different preferences, and in general, it's really good to grant what they're asking for, because they are in better knowledge about their own physiology, their own desires, they have their own experience, and they know about their family situation and commute time, etc. So granting preferences and allowing for crew influence is a very important piece of also managing fatigue. Otherwise, crew will still try to cope with life outside of the published schedule, and sleep will typically suffer when you try to get life to work out. Fairness is another part, spreading things out over crew, equalizing days off and block hours, a number of sectors, but also horizontally, so that you are having an equally challenging, maybe first half of the month, like the last part of the month. Those are also important aspects, because biomathematical models rarely are aware of these long-term effects, like flying through peak season, etc. Those are under-researched. And finally, robustness. Creating a robust roster with good margins up to the regulatory limits makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons, but also from a fatigue perspective. If you learn about late changes, that you will not work early tomorrow, you're going to work late, you have plans outside of work, you try to fit everything together, and then it's simply becoming more challenging, maybe to shift your body clock rhythm while meeting those private commitments that you might have. So that's a few items there. And when it comes to the different EASA night duty types and late finishes, this is one example of how you can monitor things. So in this slide here, you see an overview of a tool for the Fatigue Safety Action Group called Concert. To the top right, you see a number. It says 173.5K. That's 173,500 flights. So this is an operation where I zoomed in on a part of this operation. We are just looking at 173,000 flights right now. And on the left-hand side, you see a possibility of filtering out those different nighttime duties, for example, or late finishes. And on the left-hand side, you also see the overall risk metric. The average risk in this operation is the NFR number there, saying 100.45. So 100 is the risk level, according to the quantification that I referred to before, for this piece of operation we're looking at right now. Now let's filter out the EASA and subtype 3 of the night duties, and we filter those out, and we can trend over time whether they become more prevalent or less prevalent. And you can see on the left-hand side now it says 516. So these night duties of the category 3 contains 5 times higher risk than the average of the entire operation, which makes sense, right? Time of day is a very important component. And that is also why EASA is focusing more deliberately on these subcategories, right? If I go back and I cancel that filter and I look at all of the night duty types, so type 1, type 2, type 3, and late finishes, all of the flights within those flight duties here are predicting on a risk level of 233, so 2.3 times higher than the average if I take all of the nighttime. But particularly subtype 3 here in this operation predicts really poorly compared to the overall part of the operation. So I shared a couple of resources there on the right-hand side, and we are viewing crew management as a production process. You are producing over and over with a certain result, and you can apply statistical process control to that process to try to single out what is not natural variation and detect true trends that you are becoming better or worse over time. So I also share that on the right-hand side. If we drill into this operation now to look a little bit more detail, what's behind the numbers, because we are looking at right now at 74,000 flights out of those 173 that we started off with. So if I drill in and I take up a flight table, an alertness distribution plot, we can see here we have the poor flights that are predicting low in alertness to the left-hand side and a good one to the right-hand side. And if I drill into the poor ones and I go into looking at just one of them at random, you can see here we have one flight, and this is actual flown data. So you see on the first green blob there, just prior to it, you have a very long briefing. This is a ground delay of the departure time. That basically means that the first flight there becomes a full night duty, basically. And that is then resulting in that the second flight that has the red border is becoming much more challenging according to the biomathematical model. Right now, I place myself just after departure on the second flight there with a red border, and you can see to the bottom right, you can see a radar chart that explains why at that time things are still okay. But if I move to the end of the flight and I place myself here, you can see to the bottom right on the radar chart that now we have a quite problematic combination of time of day, time awake, and prior sleep debt that will interact and make this challenging for two-pilot operation. And looking back at it, even though the flight duration doesn't really motivate it, here it would have been good to have some relief present. But I'm also then sharing another resource here, how to read these predictions out of the model more in detail. And finally, the fourth one on data collection, fatigue mitigation strategies, turning more to the crew themselves. I'm coming back to the app that I showed you initially, where you can basically have crew loading their roster continuously, and they can customize it to their own diurnal type, whether they are early birds or owls, their commute times, etc. And if you look closely here, on my last week, you see my sleep and wakefulness there, picked up from a wearable device. In this case, my Apple Watch is feeding the app. Those blue periods are sleep periods, The white periods are wakefulness, so confirmed wakefulness, in this case picked up by steps. So there's an assumption if you move around, you are awake. If you're up walking, it's not necessarily true all the time, but in my case, it is. And you can see the night between the 22nd and the 23rd, there's a gap there. We have neither confirmed sleep nor confirmed wakefulness. And that's one night where I didn't wear my Apple Watch. I left it on the charger. And then you can see that the biomathematical model has jumped in. That gray period there is predicted sleep out of the model. So even if you miss out sort of logging things, it doesn't mean that it's assumed that you're awake. The model will then jump in and sort of cover those gaps there. This tool can be used for fatigue prevention and mitigation also. So that is built into the tool, and you can see your predicted sleep debt, etc. It's available on iPad and iPhone, and interestingly, it's available free of charge on App Store. So if you like to try it out, it's just to download it. The name is Crew Alert. You see it on the top right there. We also have one dedicated data collection app. Of course, biomathematical models will predict things, but if you want to know what is really going on within the operation, you can of course also collect data. And as of recently, we also built in this sleep logging functionality into this app, which is called Crew Alert Topo Descent, where you can activate Apple Health Kit and automatically pick up sleep and wake. This could be a good tool if you like to survey, for example, volunteers among your crew members, how they are sleeping in a particular layover. Because often we are working with operators where maybe a part of the crew are challenged with this layover many time zones out, whereas others are not experiencing issues. And then it could be good to try to cross-learn here what are good strategies for sleeping on that outstation that people have found out is working better or worse for them. So I'm sharing a couple of data sheets here also on how to run these data collections. And last but not least, if you're not a fan of using apps and those kind of tools, we also have a document that is meant to be used straight for the crew members and explaining a lot of the mitigation strategies that can be used, in this case focusing particularly on coping with night duties, which is the most challenging part. So this document is publishing this document, I need to say, to the credit of EASA, is a direct effect of the work that was done on appropriate FRM. So this document sums up for crew themselves, how do you best prepare for upcoming night duty, and how do you think about mitigation strategies. Obviously there's variation between the individuals there, but this is what the sort of scientific position is. The use of caffeine, the need for high hydration, of avoiding exercise before bedtime, all of those different things there are within the document, focusing on preparing and mitigating for night duties. So with that, I'm wrapping up on time, I think, and I think we will have a common question and answer session, I think. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, thanks. And if I could ask the people who presented just to come up and take a seat, and we'll go through some questions next. Again, it's really interesting to watch the questions as they come in and see the different things we have. So can we project the questions there? Oh, there we go. Excellent. Perfect. So ironically, it's one of the downsides of going first is that people have had longer to upvote the Transavia related questions, so there might be a rush first of ones for you. So the first one is, which departments are in the fatigue working group? Are the pilot reps included, and what differentiates what you do from a full FRMS? Maybe we do the first bit first, so you're able to.
Which departments? Let me think. We have cabin, cockpit, of course.
You can maybe move the microphone a little bit closer to you just to help. Yeah, thanks.
The rostering
rostering,
and long-term planning as well.
yeah. Pilot reps are not included. They really want, they would like to be included, but for now they're not included yet. Is misschien voor jou difference from
I think the other one's more of a kind of progressive question. You know, I don't think it's necessarily for you.
Oh, okay.
What differentiates it from a full FRMS? I think that's, you've kind of explained
Oh,
what you
okay,
do. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
and we've talked a lot of previous conferences about a full, you know, we have examples of full FRMSs. So
Yeah,
that's
this is
probably
not
not
a-
necessarily for you to be able to answer in this context. But. Ooh, sorry. The next one's actually for Jeppesen. You mentioned the use of the Apple Watch to collect data. What about scientific validity of the Apple Watch as a device?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's a number of studies out in the last few years showing that wearables are taking good steps forward when it comes to collecting sleep periods and representing them fairly accurately. But definitely there's probably, and there is, big differences between different devices. When it comes to the sleep period time, I think you can probably trust that more than the sleep phases that you are in during that sleep time. But we are not locking in on the Apple Watch as such. We are connecting our functionality to the Apple Health Kit. So any device that feeds Apple Health Kit, whether it's a Jawbone or Fitbit or Whitings or Bedit or Apple Watch or something else, that's the information we are picking up. And we're keeping, within our collected data, we're keeping track of what device it originated from. So that's the best we can currently do for scaling this massively. And we think that the value is still there, even though you don't necessarily get it exactly right. The massive amounts of data that this allows for collecting compared to distributing devices or going about it in the more traditional way, it still brings a lot of value.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Appropriate FRM is an effective tool for managing fatigue for night flights and late arrivals. Should EASA extend the scope of appropriate FRM to other FDP? Maybe I don't know if any of the panel have a comment, and then maybe as any of my EASA colleagues can. Or there's a microphone here if you want to use that.
So hello, sorry, talking from the hall. Good question, Didier. We're not sure. Actually, we don't think so. So that's a clear answer. But a good question, and I would like to know what our panelists think about this on appropriate FRM.
Well, I have a comment there. I think EASA has done the right thing here, focusing on the most challenging part of the operation. It's the classic piece, right? How do you eat an elephant, piece by piece? And I mean, start with the most problematic part, and I think that is the correct approach.
And it's really interesting when I you know, as somebody who's not an expert remotely in this topic, I remember being struck throughout the three conferences we have of the very bespoke differences between each operator's requirements. I remember in the first conference in Vienna, for those of you that were there, we had DHL talking about their cargo operation and lots of night flight challenges, Austrian talking about kind of how their schedule of feeding flights to the US mean early starts for flights in Europe, and there's lots of different models, I think. So, like you say, trying to create a set of rules that meets everybody's needs on those kinds of things can be really challenging. You know, this is a challenging enough topic already. Yeah. Any other comments on that? Or you okay? We'll move on to the next one. So next one to Transavia again. How does the combination of fatigue reports and safety fast explicitly look like?
Well, we have a dashboard for the fatigue report. And of course, we compare that to the safety fast analysis. And of course, it depends on the fatigue report if we can match those or not. But we do that all the time.
We actually have an example of that where a Safety Fast will tell us, well, it's in our range of questionable, but still okay. And then when we look at the reports, and people go like, no, we're actually quite happy with this flight and the way it is. So it gives a richer picture, as like not only Safety Fast, but also listen to what our crews tell us.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you very much. Cool. So the next one, again, well, for both the operators in this context, what difference do you see from appropriate FRM versus managing fatigue in operator responsibilities and SMS?
Wow. It's a bigger responsibility. Well, we see it as a transition. It's bigger than we had before. The night flight, only bigger than 10 hours, and now we have to look at the whole night. And we see that there's a lot more transition needed from the company to understand what this means. It's not just training pilots on behavior, but it's also teaching our planners on what the impact is of what they do. So I think it's bigger. It asks more of us than just what's in our SMS.
No, Linards, go on.
Generally speaking, I wanted to say that I agree with Transavia colleagues because, as I said, a lot of new things that weren't there before for us, especially for the offices the colleagues mentioned, had to be introduced, and it's different. It's different. That's the general answer.
And I guess in a wider, as a follow-up, is in terms of your management of risk as an organisation, do you feel better that now you potentially know things and address things that you maybe didn't before? It's the extra work kind of go, but we know these things now, isn't that great?
I'd say definitely, because before you just didn't see those things potentially. Now you just notice them and that they exist within your operation, and then, you can work.
And fatigue has become a bigger part of the whole safety picture.
Yeah, interesting. Cool, thanks for that. Thanks, Sarah, for the question there. From Barbara, has the frequency of fatigue reporting increased during the introduction of fatigue management process?
Well, we're working on that. We would like the crew to report more. But also that's a question of communication and gaining trust.
Actually, we don't have the statistics about this. I mean, it happens, and the fact that we have now the processes for night duties, generally speaking, it could be that it has actually improved the situation for night duties. That's my basic answer. I mean, we don't have the stats, but I think it might have even decreased because we're more aware of actually what we're planning or not planning.
It's kind of the age-old question I've talked about. Certainly the work we do with occurrence reporting and data is something I've done before I came to EASA for many years as well, so kind of nearly 25, 30 years working on it. And it's been kind of the age-old discussion is you work on a topic and you think, the management think the goal of working on a topic and putting resources into something is that a number of them come down. And ironically, in very, very many cases, because everybody's talking about a topic, the first thing that happens is the number of reports goes up. And everybody sits in management meetings and looks at, oh my goodness, look, the performance indicator went up, despite the fact that we did all this extra work. And that's a bad thing, rather than kind of openly saying, well, the more people talk about it, the better it gets. And then you have this other kind of approach of, I'm going to quote, I can't believe it, the old, is it Wayne's World quote, where they say, build it and they will come. I think it was the Doors originally, wasn't it? But, you kind of build a process like you built in your different companies, and you hope people will report more, but it's kind of what comes first, how does that feed into your organizational culture? And then the other thing then I've seen in a lot of organizations is you build something like that, you were talking about your night flight situation, people are then talking about the solutions that are in place, so people then report less because they hear that there's a solution coming and they almost stop reporting. But human behavior is so strange and so many different companies and cultures, it's almost impossible to predict. I could talk about this all day, so I won't. The next one, noise and vibration create fatigue, 2 elements experienced by flight crew. Does the BAM model take noise and vibration into account?
Short answer is no. Well, there's a lot of things that biomathematical models are not taking into account. When you talk to airlines of different with different types of operation, overflying the Himalayas is very fatiguing. I'm hearing having layovers on high altitude, less oxygen, crew are becoming more fatigued. There's a lot of things that biomathematical models are not taking into account that are simply not researched, or there's not data out there to base it on. That said, I think most models have a possibility for operators to supplement them with operational experience in various ways. And we have within BAM also. You can, if you like, add on the side an extra risk element connected to operating driven by time and AC type, for example, taking this into account.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, it's something it comes up a lot when we write particularly do a lot of safety promotion on whether reporting. We've got an article in the next Conversation Aviation magazine around the use of AI to support safety management, and kind of the big conclusion, I think, I'm a bit of an old traditionalist, but I think it's probably not anything controversial to say that, data's great, but unless you're having conversations with actual people about what the reality is, you can have all the data you like, but it's all completely pointless. And it's kind of how you match the two together that's kind of gives you your intelligence. We specifically in EASA, when we went through our transition and a previous reorganization about 12, 13 years ago that formed the Flight Standards Directorate, is we also formed the Safety Intelligence Department with collaborative groups with industry at the heart of it, exactly so we brought together what industry were actually seeing with all the nice things we would see from the data, and just having one without the other didn't really help. So the next one, if you allow personal preferences to be an influence, could this lead to more fatiguing schedules? Yeah, and I see where the question is coming from, and it's a valid point, of course. But if you think of it in the following way, I mean, we're trusting the pilots and the cabin crew with a lot of responsibilities here for the passengers and the vehicle. And given that I have provided training on fatigue risk, which is a requirement, it's still the case that they will know more about their personal family situation, their own physiology, they have their own experience from back in time, and in our opinion, overriding the importance of a biomathematical model that is based on the average individual. So these individuals should, I think, as a baseline, be trusted that they know what they are doing. If it turns out that we have an individual that time over time is asking for something that turns out to be very fatiguing, and there are fatigue reports filed and complaints, etc., well, then that's need to be dealt with as an exception and probably the basis of a coaching call, as I see it. Cool, fantastic, thanks. Another question for you, actually. How do you manage data ownership across the different input to the model, such as Apple, etc.? Yeah, so when you collect data, obviously on individuals, there's a lot of considerations to be taken. If you do a research study that you will publish, you not only need to, of course, comply with GDPR, but there's also something called the Declaration of Helsinki when you do research on human beings. So we're dealing with all of these things appropriately, of course, but it's also in the app you have certain levels of consent that you need to provide before you can even send up data. But in this simple app that I showed you last, where you basically have to do a self-assessment on KSS and automatically get sleep and wakefulness collected, we basically have
a total anonymity built in. It's only the collecting organization that know who the individuals are. So they need to collect their own consent from the participants. It is they that are doing the data collection using our tools. So, yeah.
Would including pilot groups in your working group help with fatigue increased reporting? I guess it's a next step potentially for...
Potentially, next step, but it's not
it's,
up to me.
Yeah, indeed. And
So, yeah.
Interesting. How do you account for individual differences in vulnerability to fatigue in your systems? How do you comfort individuals?
For example, we try to grant the preference of people. So if somebody wants an early roster, we try to grant that, or a late roster if they have those kind of preferences.
Linards, from your side, is that something possible in a smaller operator like yours? So how you account for individual preferences in your approach?
Sorry, I was just already looking at the next question. So how do we account for individual differences?
I can imagine in a small operator, you kind of know each other more.
Yeah.
So as you're building it, it's not like you have hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, the smaller the airline, the more kind of you let these individual differences into your operation. Because I think crew kind of, it's easier for them to communicate to us, to actually give the message to us that something does or does not work, which I think is just impossible in organizations like Transavia, where there's, I don't know what is the amount of crew you have, but for us, yeah, we get some feedbacks, and of course, since we are rather smaller, we try to actually work with what the crew provides to us, and actually to make their lives better as much as we can. Yeah.
I can comment from a high-level perspective also, looking at this when the rosters and schedules are built for the larger airlines, right? I think every single one has a systematic way of collecting preferences from their crew members. I like to have the 14th off. I like to have short pairings coming back to base every day, or I like to have more condensed production. Those kind of preferences, or layover in Barcelona, or whatever it might be, those preferences are collected massively over all of the crew and goes into the overall rostering process. So this is a major thing of allowing them influence. When it comes to individual differences, and looking at it from a biomathematical perspective, you can also base it on, in the crew pairing process, you need to assume that everybody is of intermediate chronotype, for example. But in the rostering step, you might have individual information. This is a person of early type, this is of late type. And then you can inform the model about that to have a more accurate prediction, of course.
Fantastic, thanks. ETF, what are the non-fly scores determined in your saved first for your operation?
So the way we went about this one, initially we basically went with the thresholds that were set by SAFTE-FAST, I guess within the system. But what I also mentioned in my presentation is that we actually want to evaluate if what we are using actually makes any sense for the crew. Because this, you get some number that, let's say, is illegal, but the realities could be that actually the situation is better, or could actually be that the situation is way, way worse. So, as I said, this is what we're planning to do. Yeah, to do some more evaluation to see actually if the thresholds
works in practice. Yeah. Another question for Tomas from Jeppesen. When using NFR in the optimizer, how do you understand its priorities versus implementing specific fatigue costs, such as avoid specific duty combinations?
Yeah, so what operators can do, our operators, is to put a limit there. We will not allow a flight to be planned worse than a certain limit. But the main thing really is to reduce the overall risk exposure. So the NFR reflects the overall risk exposure. You can think of it as a sum of all of these small probabilities that start with 0, comma, and a lot of zeros over all of the flights, and you sum that up. That's the sum that you try to reduce. But I need to also mention that, of course, crew management is a big compromise. It's a multi-objective planning problem. You need to reach a certain productivity, you need to control layover costs, you need to control robustness, fairness, and a number of other things. So this is one component, and each operator decides how much emphasis they are placing on reducing risk compared to maybe reducing layover costs, as one example.
Fantastic, thanks. We've got probably 3 minutes before we need to go and do the photograph, so I'll do these last 2 questions and then we'll call it a day there. So the first one then for Tomas. How does BAM cope with the changes made by the schedules after roster publication? Can last-minute changes be properly assessed by the model?
Yeah, so our model is connects into the system and becomes part of the system itself. So there's no data sent back and forth over files. So as soon as you have a flight delay, that risk marker might pop out, for example, if it becomes more concerning.
Okay, fantastic. And then for the last one, for Lydia, maybe from Transavia, for planners, practically, when can they decide by themselves, and then when do they have to escalate?
Well, of course, if there aren't any costs involved. Then, for example, we have long-term planning is looking at pairings and sometimes multi-day pairings. And then we see there's a risk, fatigue risk. If they can change some flights and maybe shorten shorter flights instead of a longer flight, they can swap that. And that doesn't have any impact on the rest of the flights and the schedules. They can just do that. There's no problem. Do you have any?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't have any impact on how many people that we need for something, or it doesn't have an impact on the network, then they're free to do anything what they need to get a better fatigue score.
Thanks very much. So huge thanks to our panelists.